you, Mr. Master of Ceremonies, and good night to all of Barbados. Good night to the Barbados Labour Party. Good night to the good people of St. James Central, and especially a very good night to the people of St. James South. I want to hail every one of you who are within the sound of my voice, because tonight is an important night, because there are things that we have to discuss that are important. And I want to get to the heart of the matter. My simple task here tonight is to say to you, it is time to fire the Dems, and it is time for you to throw your full support behind the Barbados Labour Party. And therefore I'm asking you to give support to Kerry Simmons in St. James Central and to Sandra Husbands in St. James South. And why is it that you need to put your support behind us? Because this country is crying out for leadership. This country is crying out for guidance and competence. Government is a serious undertaking. Government and asking people to follow you is something that you should never do lightly. For when you say that you want to govern, you're saying to people, trust me with your life. You're saying to people, you can depend on my judgment. You can trust in my accuracy. You can rely on my ability and competence to deliver what I say I'm going to deliver to you. That is what you are saying when you say to people, give me a government. And our experience today has led every right-thinking Barbadian to come to the conclusion that this Democratic Labour Party is incapable of leading this country or bringing any level of competence to the affairs of Barbados. And therefore they have to be dismissed, and they have to be dismissed out of hand. Most Barbadians have been saying the length and breadth of this constituency. When is the election? These people don't know what they're doing. This is a cry everywhere. And even the people who support the Dems find themselves having to explain the inexplicable. They find they have to defend the indefensible. They have to make excuses for the foul-ups, bleeps, and blunders that have attended this Democratic Labour Party administration. Never in the history of this country has the DLP ever fielded a set of people to govern that is the worst that we have ever seen. It is the worst government at the worst possible time. The Barbados Labour Party has always brought a level of competence and ability to everything that they do. Whether it is building the economy, whether it's putting in place social services, whether it's lifting up the poor, whether it's broadening the horizons of the young, we've always brought a level of competence. And in our 14 years, we made Barbados to be a star. We made Barbados the envy of the Caribbean. And in 4 short years, this Democratic Labour Party has brought this country to junk. And now the latest fiasco that they're presenting us with is that they're bringing us down to the level of a dump. Junk and dump, same junk. Time to get rid of the Dems. Better must be done, and better can be done. Whenever you come to government, you must have a vision, you must have a plan, and you must be able to say that you possess the qualities necessary to execute that plan. You must have access to the competencies. How many of you, if you had a car and you were taking it down to your mechanic and some fellas were skylarking by the corner by the mechanic, and they say to you, look, give me a chance, man. It's my turn. Man, you get that man all the time. Why you don't give me a chance that we could practice? There is none of you in this crowd, not one of you. Nigel wouldn't do it. Martin would not do it. Beverly would not do it. None of you would take your car and hand it to people who don't know what they're doing. Yet this is the basis on which the Dems came to Barbadians and said to them that the reason why we should put them in office is because it is their turn. Well, the circumstances and the experiences of the last 4 years have taught us this, that never again in the history of this country should any party be put into government just because. That from here on in, every Barbadian must take seriously when we exercise our vote. And the question we must always ask, is this party ready to govern? Are they competent to lead the country given the circumstances in which we find ourselves? And no other basis must be made available for people to govern other than, can you do the job? This is not an amateur show. Government is not American Idol or teen talent competitions. It is the serious management of the affairs of people that affects their daily lives, that affects whether they eat, whether they sleep, whether they have a roof over their head. It's going to affect whether they can pay their bills. It will affect their image. It will affect their dreams, and therefore that vote must be taken seriously. When the Democratic Labour Party came to office in 2008, they came with one plan and one plan only. Their plan was simply to win an election. And since then, that plan has not changed course in one iota. Everything that they have done since coming into office has been about how they're going to win the election again. And hence, they had no plan to govern. Without a plan to govern, you are going to have foul-ups, bleeps, and blunders. And that is going to be the theme of what I'm sharing with you tonight. Barbados has been the victim of this sorry saga by this DLP administration, just fumbling and bumbling from one crisis to another, unable to govern and govern effectively. And this has created painful costs for Barbadians. This has affected people's lives, people's livelihood. And they have, the Democratic Labour Party has demonstrated to everyone that they do not have the competence to govern, and this is why we must send them packing. This is why we must send them home. One of the things that has been really important to me is to see the growth and the development of our democracy as we have walked this road with the Dems. And one of the lessons that I think has been given to us as a people is that we must pay attention. We must pay attention to the people who govern us, and we must pay attention to the people who say to us they want to lead. This metal dump is only another in the series of foul-ups, bleaks, and blunders that the Dems have treated Barbadians to. The metal dump, which is just a few hundred yards away from here, was once a quarry site. And this was a site from which stone was hewn in order to build the harbor, or Bridgetown Harbor. And it left a huge crater that was as much as 66 feet deep. And into this dump, the government decided that they would use it and fill it up by taking all the metal that we generate as a community and compact it within that particular dump. But when I think about that metal dump, it reminds me of the Dems in truth, because they seem to have a crater 66 feet wide in their minds that they have allowed to be filled with a level of ignorance and arrogance that has brought ruin to this country. Because whenever you get that combination, ignorance and arrogance, all you can do is bring ruin. I think the Bible probably captures it well. In Ecclesiastes, there's a verse that goes something like this, that there is an evil under the sun. And this evil is, fools are put into many high positions. Proverbs captures it a different way. Proverbs says, for lack of guidance, a nation falls. And our nation is adrift this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Our nation has found itself on the brink where it can become a failed state. And why is that? Because we are at risk allowing our country to stay in the hands of the Democratic Labour Party. I want you to remember a few things. When they opened in 2008, they treated us to a series of blunders that had us aghast, just thinking they can't be serious. How many of you remember that they started off with, we're going to balance the budget with a small deficit? How many of you remember the cell phone tax that was in no way collectible? Or the bicycle tax, which would bring in revenue that would not even cover the administrative costs of putting it in place. How many of you shopkeepers were the victim of that rapid increase in your fees that made it impossible for you to be able to turn a profit in your little business, and your business started to fail? So on top of all the other economic pressures, you had government hitting you for heavy licensing fees that made it impossible for you to stay afloat. But you think that the ignorance to which they treated Barbadians, they would try to keep it secret and don't let anybody else across the world know what folly was taking place in this country. You know that the leaders of the Democratic Labour Party decided they were going to broadcast that ignorance abroad all across the region and on the international scene. How many of you remember Ever So Welcome Wait for a Call? And all it did was stir resentment across the region to Barbadians, as if we did not have enough of that already. How many of you remember the more recent ones, like talking about pigtail mentality and talking about sore nipples on the international arena, saying things in public that never should be uttered? Or the very latest that I still can't get my head around, telling young people to stop stacking up a lot of qualifications and go and start your own business. After we spend so much time trying to help our young people to understand the importance of being qualified and getting an education, you could get a prime minister talking about stop stacking up qualifications. I could never understand that comment. But if those were the only things, the foul-ups, bleeps, and blunders that fall from their mouths that only demonstrate their ignorance, you could just laugh it off and say we'll wait them out. But they have made some expensive blunders. We had the Marina fiasco, the Pearhead fiasco. We had the Four Seasons. Coverly is something that it baffles me to understand how a government could sit down and conceptualize a project like Coverly to the disadvantage of so many Barbadians. The failure, for example, to deal with the Eager 11, the Alexandra mess, that soap opera that we are treated to every evening now in the newspaper and on television. Tomas, what about the roundabouts? What about Clico? All of these are the things that we have been treated to as foul-ups, bleeps, and blunders by the Democratic Labour Party. But that is what happens when ignorance meets arrogance. Now, one of the examples, I think, of the most poorly planned policies is the foul-up, bleep, and blunder that has been offered to us by Innes as the Minister of Health. When you look at the drug reform, there is not a Barbadian who cannot tell you that they have been impacted adversely by that drug reform program that he has put in place. There is nothing that has been more insensitive, more badly planned than that drug reform plan. The only goal of that drug reform plan was to save $25 million. That's all it was. It was never about making healthcare better for Barbadians. It was not about preserving its sustainability in the long term. It was simply to find $25 million to cut from off the budget to satisfy international agencies that, look, we are making an effort to rein in our deficit. That's all it was. The approach that was taken to that particular reform reminds me of a butcher. Imagine if you hire a butcher to supervise weight loss for people who were severely overweight and they had to lose at least 20 or 40 pounds. Instead of coming up with a sensible reducing diet that will allow the person to gradually and safely drop weight and maintain and sustain their health, they took the butcher approach. Chop off a leg, you're 40 pounds lighter now. That is exactly the approach that was taken to that drug reform plan. And what was the impact of that? Here you have a situation where there was no plan to raise the stock levels, no plan to have additional pharmacists, additional spacing or seating, no plan as to how they were going to deal with the elderly who would have to struggle and make their way to that public pharmacy instead of the private pharmacy around the corner from them. And so what they have done is put in place something that does not work well. But if that were all, they've substituted drugs on the formulary, some of which that do not work as well as some of the others that were there. But what was the plan. It was to cut $25 million without the necessary regard for whether or not that medication was going to be the very best for Barbadians. And so you have people who are hypertensives who say that their doctors are not satisfied with the high blood pressure medicine on the formulary. And so ask them, if you can afford it, buy the regular one from your pharmacy. You have doctors who are not happy with the medication that the diabetics have to use because it makes them ill, and say to them, if you can afford it, buy the regular one from the pharmacy. You have people on cholesterol medicine that is actually creating heart palpitations and tightening around the heart, and doctors have had to say to their patients, listen, if you can afford the other medication, go and get it, because the one on the formulary does not work well with you. They have put at risk the health of Barbadians through ill-planned, knee-jerk drug reform that is another foul-up, bleak and blunder that the Barbadian public has to endure from the Minister of Health. And what was, I can't call it amusing, what was distasteful to me just this week was the minister actually saying in the public, can you imagine, Barbados is now at a stage where we're getting at least 3 strokes every 2 days. People are being admitted with strokes every 2 days, 3 at least. And as though he does not know what has caused that. Well, the average Barbadian can tell him what are some of the probable causes why you've seen an increase in strokes in Barbados. It is not only that over the years people have not eaten well, it is that now with the economic pressures, people are eating even less well because they cannot afford the food that they need to use to manage their diabetes, to manage their hypertension. It is not only because they cannot afford the food, it is that because of the pressures with the bills, the pressures with the utilities, the pressures with the rent, not having a job, not being able to keep the roof over their head and to pay the rent on time, that people's blood pressure is rising and rising, and so the incidence of stroke and heart attack will rise in this country. Is that not true? Are your neighbors not more stressed? Is your blood pressure not higher? And as long as we continue to have this government in place, we are going to see a constant deterioration in the well-being of Barbadians. An old lady shouted out to me as I was passing through Haynesville. I don't know what her name is, but she saw me in the distance and she said, Miss Husbands, you know that this Democratic Labour Party trying to kill all the old people? And that was just after they had done that thing with the drug reform. She is totally convinced that somehow the Democratic Labour Party has something against old people. Well, how could you reassure her that this was not the case? It was impossible to reassure her because a week or 2 later, guess what happened? That was when the Dems decided that it was time that every old person has to get up and go and open a bank account at the nearest bank to receive their NIS check because they were no longer prepared to carry the cost of people receiving their checks at home. Now that is okay for seniors who are comfortable with the bank, who are comfortable with an ATM, who have a checkbook and can sign a check. But for some elderly people, people who live in some of the working communities, who are not as familiar with those procedures and only go to the bank maybe 2 or 3 times a year, this presents a tremendous hardship. Imagine you have to get up every 2 weeks and go to the bank to get your money because you want to get a little food, you want to buy a little bottle of gas. Then you could just go by the supermarket and get your check cash, or ask the people at the church to give it, to change it for you, or to ask somebody to go and change that check for you. Without thinking, without regard for the well-being of the elderly in our country, they come up with a plan that was another foul-up, another bleep, and another blunder. But let me tell you something. I put it to you, St. James South. I put it to you, St. James Central. I put it to you, Barbados, that this country urgently needs a new Minister of Health. We need a Minister of Health who will turn up and work and do the right thing, instead of treating us to these follow-up bleeps and blunders that he is proposing in front of us. Every single day, you see that man in the newspaper or on television, because he has turned the work of a minister into a public relations exercise. 7 days a week he's got speeches that he intends to make on and give you an opinion on everything under the sun. But if you check his last 25 speeches, there is nothing in those speeches that announces an improvement, that announces an action that actually takes the health of Barbados forward. It is always an opinion about this or about that. And that is not a substitute for effective governance of health care. That type of public relations exercise, which is just to promote the self, will only impress people who are absent-minded and therefore not paying attention to the content, or the gullible who feel that if you can get on TV every day, you would have to be good. But if you examine carefully what he's talking about, he's not announcing any action that is making anything better. The most insulting thing for me was to hear that Barbadians are saying that we have problems still in casualty, it's still taking long. They're still complaining that there's not enough equipment on the ward, that there are not enough nurses to give the kind of care, especially at night on the ward, and that healthcare in our institution is not up to the standard that meets their needs. Yet, despite that, they could find money not to spend on more nurses or on more equipment, but they could find money to build a portico to adorn the front of the hospital, as though that was the most important need that Barbadians had in healthcare. I'm saying to you, we need a minister of health who will go to work every single day and do what is needed to improve health in this country. And there's only one person that I know right now who can do that, and that is Jerome Walcott. Time to get rid of Innes. Time to send him home. Time to send him home. When ignorance and arrogance meet, you will always get foul-ups, bleeps, and blunders. And here it is, a cabinet sat down. Now remember when we got that downgrade to junk status? We were all amazed and surprised when it turned up in the newspaper. Well, let me tell you, that cabinet was not surprised, because they had to have that information prior to coming to the report being made in the newspaper. And that cabinet sat down and saw that and know that they don't have any fiscal space. Yet you could have a minister of health who could announce and wants to continue on a road where he proposes that we're going to spend $800 million on a hospital and site it up at Kingsland, which is another dump. I don't know what's the fascination of this government with dumps, with this metal dump here, and they want to use a dump up Kingsland to site a hospital. But he could get up and make an announcement like that, knowing that he does not have the fiscal space, nor does he have any plan as to how to create the fiscal space to allow them to get that hospital. And they are saying that in a time when they do not have money, well, they're going to go prepare to purchase fresh land to put up that hospital, when we have land at Lower Estate. Government has acres at Lower Estate that they could site a hospital. Or they could use the Emor site, which is slightly raised above the level of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital at Martindale's Road, to build another hospital where you would not have to look for fresh money. But no, he wants to site one at Kingsland. I want to know, what is the attraction, what is the attractiveness of Kingsland over these other sites? He needs to give us an answer. He needs to give us an answer. I am prepared to tell you tonight that the truth is, if any doctor, any mechanic, any chef, any lawyer had made as many blunders and foul-ups as this government has in 4 years' time, I'm putting it to you, they would be fired. I'm saying to you that there is no way anybody could keep their job with their record. And that is why the voters, the constituents of this constituency, St. James Central and St. James South, you've got to send Hudson and Innes packing. I'm saying to the voters of Barbados, you've got to send the Democratic Labour Party packing, because they are not ready to govern. They are not ready to bring to us what it is we need. And what is it that we need today, ladies and gentlemen? Barbadians at this moment feel very insecure. They're uncertain about the future. Barbadians feel very stressed about their lives, and they're uncertain about the hope for tomorrow. And they do so with good reason, because they cannot have any confidence in this government. And this is why it is necessary for us to seek a new mandate, to look for a party that has the ability to bring the leadership and the competence that we need to move us from out of the morass in which we find ourselves. And this is one of the reasons why I want to offer myself for office. I feel that Barbados needs new hope. I feel that Barbados is capable of so much more than what we are experiencing at the moment. I am confident that we can bring a vision for Barbados that will open new opportunities for people. I am excited about what the prospects are for this country. Yes, things may be difficult, but there are also new opportunities that are waiting for us to grasp them if we have the right plan and if we have the right approach. And this is why I feel that there are new areas that we can explore, whether it is in IT, whether it is in agriculture, whether it is in leisure management services, education services. There are so many areas that we can pursue at this point in time that can bring new opportunities to our young people, that they can dream again and believe that they can get a job that allows them to effectively use their skills, or that they could have the opportunity to start a business in a climate that is conducive to them to succeed. This is what we want to bring to Barbados. This is what I want to bring to St. James South. And I believe that is something that we have to do together, because this is not a task that can be undertaken by 30 people alone. The task that is before us is going to require every single Barbadian to understand the role that they have to play in helping to make this vision a reality. It's going to call for change. And the changes that this is going to require from us is that first, we begin to have confidence in ourselves again, that we can succeed. It is going to call for us to change the way we see ourselves and how we treat ourselves. It's going to ask of us to change the way we conduct ourselves. Were you shocked at what you saw in the middle of the paper this week as our conduct during crop over? It saddened me, but I'm happy to say the majority of Barbadians don't behave that way. We have much more dignity and pride than that. And one of the things we must not do is glorify that behavior. We must behave better and treat ourselves better. It is when we believe in ourselves, when we believe in our potential, when we rally around a leadership that has the competence to take us somewhere, that we will have a better chance of making a better life for us. And every right-minded Barbadian that has before them their children and want to see the best for them must know that in the upcoming election they cannot vote for the Dems. Every Barbadian who has a responsibility to make the best life for themselves cannot in all conscience vote for the Democratic Labour Party. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time. The time is now, and I have a message for Frundle Stewart. Frundle, the Barbadians in this country, their one message to you is call the election. Do not wait, do not delay. Do not set up a commission of inquiry. Do not sit and contemplate the report. Do not wait until it comes to you on the piece of paper. We are giving you a message loud and clear tonight. It is time to call the elections. Call it now. Let us get a new government and let my people go.